that Father Greg has been able to join us. We've got Joe Berry down in Somerset, who has also agreed to join us, and Paul Gray, our very own Paul Gray in Scotland. So a cosmopolitan guest list for you. And we're going to tackle this very important topic, a topic which is so dear to our hearts just now during the COVID crisis across the world, where people are experiencing so much anguish and trauma through the events, and looking for a little bit of hope and a little bit of something to look forward to. What's the new normal going to be when we come out of this? So the format is going to be quite straightforward. I'm going to ask each of our guests to speak for about 5 minutes each, and they're going to outline who they are and what they do, and give us their thoughts, general thoughts on the subject matter that's here. We've then had some people have sent in questions to us in advance, so there's an opportunity to put some of these questions to them. But if you haven't sent in questions in advance and you feel something that you would like to say and something to take part, then please send us that message, and our team will filter it through to me, and I'll try and get it in front of the panel. We reckon we're going to be on air for over an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and it gives you an opportunity to get your question answered or your thoughts. But I hope you enjoy the thoughts of our panel members as we go ahead. So without further ado, because you're not here to hear me speaking, I'm going to ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves and their thoughts on the subject matter. And if you want to tweet about it, I'll be obliged if you use the hashtag Hope After Trauma, and then we can all see what everybody else is thinking. Thank you for that. So, Father Greg, out there in Los Angeles, would you like to kick us off with just a little thought, who you are, why you're here, and your thoughts as we move along? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be with you, and I feel very deeply connected to the folks of the Violence Reduction Program with Braveheart Industries and Street and Arrow and all my friends there. I've been there several times. And they're also part of our global Homeboy network, a connection of 147 programs in the United States and 16 outside the country that have a kind of methodology that's similar. So I'm the founder of Homeboy Industries. It's been around for 32 years. It's the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program on the planet. And it was born in Boyle Heights, a very poor area, housing projects, where we had 8 gangs at war with each other. The highest concentration of gang activity anywhere was my parish. So I buried my first young person killed because of gang violence in 1988. And this week I will bury my 236th, a young man named David. And so we did a lot of things. We started a school, and we started a jobs program, and then we started social enterprises because we couldn't find enough felony-friendly employers to give a chance to gang members. So we have 9 social enterprises. Some of them are on pause because of the pandemic, but many restaurants, bakery, silk screening and embroidery, electronic recycling, and rival enemy gang members work side by side with each other. So not only is it an opportunity for gainful employment, but it's also a chance for rival enemy gang members to enter into relational wholeness with each other. So in the early days, we used to say nothing stops a bullet like a job, and it was all about employment. But then we discovered that an employed gang member may or may not reoffend and go back to prison, and an educated one may or may not. But then we discovered that it is now our guarantee that a healed gang member won't ever reoffend. And so, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but you know, you have the ACEs study, the adverse childhood experiences, children exposed to a list of 10 things, you know, from emotional abuse to sexual abuse to physical abuse to parents who are mentally ill or incarcerated, a list of 10. Um, Experts would say if a child is sort of a 4 or a 5 on this scale, chances are they're going to have health issues and socializing issues. But every man and woman who walks through our doors at Homeboy Industries is a 9 or a 10 on this scale. I'm a 0, which doesn't make me morally superior to the 15,000 people who walk through our doors every year. But once you know that it's about healing, you know, you don't punish wounds, you heal them. And so we have a community of tenderness that receives people, holds people. So if it's true that a traumatized person will cause trauma and a damaged person may well damage, a cherished person will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing. And so a lot of times we think it's about content. If only we can insert message here and kind of convey a message through our doors at home. But it's really about context. If you create a context of a community and tenderness, so everyone who walks through our doors comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And only tenderness can scale that wall. And so as a result, in Hope After Trauma, you can create real resilience when it's born of relational wholeness within a community where people feel like they belong and they are connected. And so the idea is to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And Homeboy in that sense hopes to be the front porch of the house all of us would long to live in. So that's my report from Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles.
And very, very thought-provoking in itself, Greg. Thank you for that. As you say, a beacon, Homeboy, something that we've built Braveheart upon, trying to copy some of the good work you do. I've written down myself some of the things you said there, which resonate so well, and I'm sure a lot of people have done the same. So thanks very much for that introduction, and I look forward to coming back to you shortly. So I'm going to turn to Jo now. Jo, I first met in Livingston last year, of all places, where she did a presentation there, having lost her father, Anthony, the Brighton bombing, and all the things that happened after that. But Jo, I'll pass to you to say a few words as well.
Thank you. I also feel very honoured to be here, and wouldn't it be amazing if we had those compassion circles all around the world? It would. I'm so touched by that vision. It's wonderful. So for me, the trauma that changed me is when I was 27 and my father was killed in a terrorist attack. I had something in me that knew I could go on a journey of healing. And I just come back from spending a few years meditating in the Himalayas, and I think that gave me a strength and a sense of I could do something with this pain, with this trauma, and I want to bring something positive out of it. And I do believe that we all have an innate guidance of how we can heal. The problem is that if we've already got a backlog of trauma or abuse, or people get in the way of that, then that's severed. So I started on my own journey of healing, and something did get in the way, and I had quite a lot of going different routes and ending up sort of losing hope completely. But I got it back again, and part of me finding a way to bring sense and meaning from trauma was to meet the man who killed my father, and he came out of prison. And that was 20 years ago I first met him. We were going to have a lot of events this autumn, which obviously now we've postponed. And I met him because I thought what the bomb had done, it had severed a connection I had with him, because I had an enemy and I wanted to heal that. For me, it wasn't about him at all. It was about how can I heal that part of me that's been taken away by the bomb. the violence of the bomb. And the first meeting, he changed. He arrived at that meeting thinking that he had no problems and he was fine and he was justifying them. And then he left completely disarmed by the fact I gave him empathy, and he started his journey. And we've both been on that journey ever since. And we've traveled around the world together, but I'm mainly now, I have a charity and I'm mainly doing the work on my own. And I've been working a lot in schools in Tower Hamlets and in poor areas of London, and working with young people. And quite often they arrive and they don't have much hope that they have a voice. They don't have hope that they matter. They don't have hope that they can make a difference, you know. And one of the things that touches me most is these young people who say to me for the first time they felt heard, and they know that they matter and they're taken seriously, and they know they're positive change makers, and off they go, knowing that they have a voice. So to me, hope is something about knowing that we can change something, and it's an act of hope. It's a hope that we can do something. It's not a hope of like, I'm just going to sit here and things are going to change. No, I have a part to play in that. But how can we, and this is the question, how can we cultivate that hope, bring it out to people who are feeling utterly hopeless, utterly stuck in the trauma? And that's sort of what I'm thinking on now. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Well, that's excellent. Thank you very much for that introduction. And the day I heard you in Livingston, you could hear a pin drop in the room as you told your story. And I know there's a lot more to tell there, and we look forward to having your thoughts, Joe. So turning last but not least to our good friend Paul. Paul Gray, former Chief Executive Officer of the National Health Service in Scotland, and I was going to say retired from that, but he's got so many other jobs now that he's never really retired. And what I've really been enjoying of late, Paul, is your thoughts on Twitter, the threads you've been doing throughout this crisis, taking different aspects that people will be feeling and exploring them. And I'll ask you now to do an introduction.
Thank you, Niven. And again, I feel a real sense of privilege in being here. I was a public servant for 40 years, and public service grew on me. It started as a job that I got in my teens after I left school. But it became increasingly obvious to me over time that public service did offer ways to make a difference. But one thing I kept on learning, and my last role, as Niven says, was to be the Chief Executive of the National Health Service in Scotland. One of the things I kept learning more and more about was that journey from you should, so in other words, giving instruction or advice, to we could, in other words, let's do this together. But that's not the end of the journey. The real first step in that journey is, what would you like to do? What would work for you? And that's not the way that public service, certainly in Scotland and the UK, traditionally worked. It wasn't about wanting to know so much about what people would like to do or what mattered to them. It was rather more about implementing policy on behalf of a government. So that was a piece of learning, as I say, that grew with me throughout the whole of my career. My current roles, as Niven says, a bit varied. I'm with the University of Glasgow. I'm with the Royal College of Physicians in Edinburgh. I do coaching and mentoring on leadership. I'm also on the board of the Care Inspectorate. I just joined that. And I'm involved in judicial appointments, and probably one or two other things as well. But the Violence Reduction Unit was something that really came into my view early on in my time with the health service, because they were really foremost in taking a public health approach to thinking about violence. And that was not something that I had hitherto considered. I had seen the effects of violence. One of my jobs a good number of years ago now was in what was called at the time the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board. So the state compensated people who had been victims of crimes of violence. So I could see what violence did, both to victims and perpetrators. But the idea that you might take a public health approach to that was not foremost in people's minds. So that was a really important shift in that. 2 or 3 other things to mention, Niven, and then I'll hand back to you. The first thing is, I became quite seized of the idea that what people needed was what I called practical hope. So it's a bit to the point that Joe has already made. It's not about just sitting there and hoping something might happen, or telling people to be more hopeful because there are lots of opportunities. But what is the practical hope that is on offer? What could be different, and what would that look like? The next thing I wanted to say is that how someone feels is how they feel. We can't tell people how they should feel or how they ought to have responded or be responding to circumstances. And a phrase that I've used often, and Niven, you've probably heard me use it before, I have only ever had experience of being me. I've never been anybody else, so I've never had their experiences. I've never been through what they've been through. So the only person who can truly tell me what it is like to be you is you. And listening to that is essential. And my last point, these lessons I have learned have really been about understanding reality from a perspective that I have not experienced, somebody else's reality. And that reality, the practical hope I think we can offer collectively is that reality can be different. Because if you only have one reality, how are you meant to imagine a different one? How are you meant to imagine a reality in which you are loved, cherished, and cared for? How are you meant to imagine a reality in which your views are respected? How are you meant to imagine a reality in which punishment is not the first recourse of the state towards you? Well, I'm not a very imaginative person, but I certainly know that I cannot imagine things of which I have no experience and have never seen. So I would say hope after trauma, yes, but I would go further. I'd say hope out of trauma, and I'd say what is the new reality that we truly want to be part of creating. So thank you, Niven.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that as well. And actually, it's one of the questions I've got down here later on is what's the new reality going to look like? And so just a reminder to everybody who's watching us here, if you want to submit questions, please do so in any of the ways, email, Twitter, even text. If you've got, just get your questions to us. You can do it through the Facebook, I think, as well. And our team will pick them up and filter them through to me. So some that have been submitted in advance, and the panel have had some of these questions already. So just to kick us off with one here, with increasing numbers of people across the world feeling fearful about the future, how important is it that we find hope? And more importantly, how do we get there? Greg, do you want to start us with that?
Well, it's a thing that we encounter, of course, from our community of our hundreds and hundreds who are employed at Homeboy Industries, and we were paused, and though our cafe and our bakeries remained operational, but we pivoted to address the food insecurity by making meals for thousands of shut-ins and senior citizens. So we've received contracts from the state and the county and the city to provide meals. So they've been there, but everybody else has been home and on house arrest. And so, this I think is more a kind of a psychological stance. It's, we're only, if I could speak in spiritual terms, we're only saved in the present moment. And so somehow you have to stay anchored in the present moment. Otherwise, you're lamenting about what happened yesterday, or you're fretting about what will happen tomorrow. And so it's not so much a trick as it is a way of living, choosing to live right now in your truest self, to know that you discover your true self in loving, and then you love being loving, and you do it however you can do it. Maybe it means you text instead of hug, and maybe you talk to somebody on the phone, or you do a Zoom. There are lots of new ways for us to stay anchored, delighting in the people who are either in front of us on the screen or across our phones. And then you just have to accept what is. Otherwise, you're stuck in sadness and fear, and because you need to have some assurance of what tomorrow is going to look like, and it's a losing battle. So the more you can just be present here and now, the more hopeful people will be, I think.
So how have you supported the team, the people who have been on your program and have had to pause their work? How have you supported them?
Well, they're still getting paid, so that helps. And then we stay in touch. Therapists are seeing them using FaceTime. We have recovery groups using Zoom. Case managers and navigators are in twice daily contact with their people. So it's we've just shifted how we are present. We have classes. People are continuing to get their equivalency certificates and studying and being tutored. So it's in many ways, it continued all the work, except for tattoo removal, which you can only do right there. But everything else has continued.
Thank you, Joe. What's your answer to that question? The importance of hope, and how do we get there?
When people are feeling really scared, and there's so much uncertainty, and they're feeling lost, and their lives as they have known it has gone, then I think people need to be held where they are. People need to have the deep listening, and to recognize the loss of what they did have, and the uncertainty, and to be really heard in their fear. And there's many different ways that's happening on all the different social media platforms, and Zoom and phone, and there's all sorts of people ringing up different people, and I get a real sense everywhere there's all the community projects and loads of listening going on. And I think that's fundamental, is to listen to people where they are, and then once people feel heard and go and realize this is fine to be feeling this, this is actually a natural response to a very difficult time, is to feel scared, then they can then find more resources. And I'm having so many stories of people who are finding things that they never would thought that would help them, and doing self-care they've never done, and finding things online to give them that sustenance, because the ways we did get sustenance and support aren't there anymore. And so there are many, many new ways. But I think that there are a lot of people probably who aren't being listened to, and they're the ones I worry about. The ones who are feeling the trauma, the ones who are holding so much together for everyone else, and there's nobody there for them. The struggles. I hear stories on people ringing up radio stations, and there's a lot of listening to do, and I think that's going to be our priority, is to find ways to reach the people who right now aren't being listened to.
Well, what you were saying there about Zoom is actually leads me into another question, which I'll put to Paul there, because we have adapted to a certain extent. This is a very good example of it, where we're doing this conference by Zoom, and WhatsApp groups and support. People are contacting each other, and it's a sort of new society, if you like, that's growing up out of this. How do we encourage that type of caring behaviour to continue, Paul?
I think that's one of the most important and fundamental questions of this moment, Niven, because we're learning a lot, as Joe and Greg have said, and what a shame it would be if we looked for a normal which was simply a reversion to what we used to do. That would be a great loss and a great pity. So how do we carry it on? I think, first of all, we must constantly reinforce the fact that we value the steps and the efforts that people make to connect with one another in these new ways. They are imperfect. They have advantages. They also have disadvantages, depending on your character and personality trait. This type of interaction is either easier or harder. It's not the same for everybody. It's not an equalizing medium. And giving people a sense that this new forming of community is something that we're going to continue to value. I can't overemphasize to the point that Joe has made that, how do we capitalize on this? We should be finding now and in the future the ways to reach the people who are at the moment completely unheard, and for whom this present experience, I can only imagine, must be even worse than their past normal. People who are in situations where they're suffering or witnessing domestic abuse and violence, for example. I have to say that is something that, as a society, we really need to find a way to tackle that sort of issue in a much more meaningful way than we have achieved so far. And if something could come out of this, to me, that would be a part of the hope that we should have, which is that we can hang on to that sense of community and we can develop something better as a result, not simply be waiting for the moment when we can switch all this technology off again and disappear back into the way we did things before.
Thanks, Paul. One of our concerns going in to this was the potential for domestic abuse to take hold and for victims to have less ability to flee the home, and the figures tend to support that, and it's one of the concerns going ahead. So I'm going to come back to Joe here. What do you think is the greatest challenges to emotional health just now, Joe? What's the greatest challenges that we have just now during the COVID crisis?
Gosh, I think there's probably many answers to that. I think the uncertainty about finances and paying the rent, that is a huge challenge and burden, and how people are going to survive. And I'd like to see we come out of this with some kind of citizens' basic income that's being developed by lots of people like Guy Standing. I think the SNP are investigating this, as is the Green Party. And I think if people knew that there was enough money for food, that, and for their lodgings, that would take a massive pressure off. And that's something I'd really like to see, because I think the people who have a lot of income and have security, it's been a very different experience for them. They have been able to just be very creative, or start new business, whatever. There's the people who every day are wondering how they're going to eat. The children that are having to miss meals, and the level of poverty. And I really feel my sense is that more people are aware now than ever of, and maybe they care more. People care more about each other, and they care about people who are struggling. They care about, they know more now what it's like to be in the front line NHS, to be a teacher. And I'd like to see a lot more sharing, and for that to grow, and the love and compassion and the kindness that's there to spread around, and to just grow and build our communities on kindness and sharing, rather than greed and blame and labeling people as wrong. And that's quite a shift, but I do see that happening. I mean, in terms of mental health, that's an area that I'm giving support online. I'm quite amazed what can be done through a Zoom phone call, and to support people into finding like their own resources of what they need, and for people to know that mental health, there is support there. We have specialized trauma help, which is happening online. There's all sorts of amazing things. I mean, I personally have found things I would never have done before lockdown, which has helped helped me with my mental health, which always been room for improvement. And I will carry on doing that.
Fantastic. So what that has been one of the concerns that we've been stressing in the VRU for a while, the rise of food banks, the families that are more reliant on food banks and on charitable giving. In fact, some of our team have been working with a food bank through this crisis. What was the situation in LA? Is it similar, Greg?
Yes, I mean, with the schools closed, and of course, lower income families are reliant on breakfast and lunch being provided by the schools. And so like our folks, you know, they're accustomed to providing dinner to their kids, but not all 3 meals. And so they're trying to figure out how to pay for that. The interesting thing is that, you know, we're all in this storm together, but we're in different size vessels. You know, somebody's in a yacht and somebody's in an inner tube or a rowboat. And so the pandemic didn't create the disparity, but it certainly has illuminated it and exacerbated it. And so my hope is that something Paul had said, that, you know, it's not about returning to normal, because normal was chaotic and awful. And it's not even new normal. We want way better than normal. We want to rethink the whole social contract. At least in our country, you know, we don't have the National Health Service, you know, and for whatever you know, critique you might have of that, people just don't have health care here. And the gap between the haves and the have-nots is wide. And so maybe this is the opportunity, and I think it could, because I think people feel compassionate in terms of responding to this moment in a different way and seeing things more clearly.
Fantastic. So you mentioned the health service, which leads me on to the next question really for Paul, because I don't know what it's been in America, but we've had this phenomenon on a Thursday night at 8 o'clock where everybody goes out and claps their hands to celebrate having the NHS. And I do it, not just the NHS, I think of all the frontline workers, particularly police officers, spent most of my career being police officers, people are putting themselves in danger. And I think that they're going to confront an awful lot of issues after this, Paul. And you know, how important is it we take time to deal with our own problems as well?
I think it's essential. I mean, you will know, Niven, from experiences that you've had, that one of the key tasks of a leader is that after an incident, you have to allow space for a debrief. You have to, and it's not just about working out what went well and what didn't go so well, but also, particularly if there's been something traumatic involved, that you allow people to express themselves. So I think there are going to be points in time, it's not going to be one point in time, when people are going to have to be able to express themselves. I mean, people have lost friends, family, colleagues. You know, people have put themselves at risk. People have lost their lives, and people have died that might not otherwise have died. So I think part one is we are going to have to acknowledge the trauma, however that is done. Part two, however, a lesson I learned again in my sort of health service days. I mean, I'm not a clinician, but one of the things I did learn was not to rush to pathologize things, you know, to medicalize them. You're not looking to diagnose somebody. You're not looking to prescribe something to them, but rather that you're seeking to understand what they're telling you. And helping them not to re-traumatize themselves, but also to express themselves in a way that allows for some meaningful movement. And Greg's point about connection, I think, is very important here. And remembering that the firefighters, the police officers, the coast guards, the ambulance and paramedics, the nurses, the doctors, the porters, they are going to need to heal too. And they're going to have to be given the opportunity. I think we need to head, as Greg has said, not for a new normal, but a new balance. And part of that balance really is about allowing people to express themselves in a meaningful way, hearing what they say, and allowing them to be a fundamental part of whatever solution is arrived at. So thank you.
Thank you for that. It's difficult. I've been in touch with so many young cops just now, and I know people are struggling, and you can see the NHS workers as well, dealing with all the trauma and the loss of life, and it's difficult. I agree. We need to be thinking of how we're going to deal with that in a post-incident way. Joe, we've talked here about a variety of opportunities then, and we both, Greg and Paul, have touched on this chance for a new normal, a fairer, more equal society. How would we start that process, do you think?
Well, that's a very big question. I mean, we are starting it. This conversation is starting it. I like the idea of it's balance. We're not going back to how we were, and we've all got. I think we all share a vision of a kinder, more humane, more loving, more equal in terms of like everyone be able to have their needs met and the support for people after trauma, and that's what I think that together we can make a difference. One of the things that I see is that to me the old way is about the way which wants to punish people and make people wrong and blame people, and at the moment in the English prisons, I don't know about in Scotland, they're all in, all the prisoners are locked away for 23.5 hours a day, and they're demonized. We still treat a lot of people less than human. That it's very quick to demonize people, and I think that has to stop. And that's the work I've been doing, is to feel that kind of the pain and the wish to want to blame someone, but to change that response. And that, I think, is the work that we have to do, so that we change it from being punitive to being restorative. So we look at what is the need behind the behavior, and let's address the root of it. Let's find ways to help people heal, and that would mean changing even our prison system, even changing our schools, changing how we do business. How can we bring those values that we all appreciate and honor into all our institutions? And there've been a lot of people working on these area, a lot of people, and maybe now's the time for the people who are experts in their areas, who's perhaps haven't had a huge amount of visibility. Now they're the ones that we empower them to bring everything they know, so we can make the changes. And I think, financially, as I said before, I think that's a huge challenge, because how can we make sure that the people who, have the resources and the money to do this work, and more and more for me, like we have to start sharing the wealth. We have to find a way so that we can provide this basic support, and then the next stage of support and the next after that. But I would like to see the empathy and compassion at the heart of whatever this new, it's not even new normal. I mean, what do you say, the balance, this new balance, whatever we're creating?
Well, there's a related question to that, so I'm just going to stay with you there, Joe. One of our team recently met a mother who was introduced to a young man who had murdered her son, and her reaction was to give him a hug. And I doubt that many people could be that forgiving. So how do you find the strength to be forgiving and move on?
Yes, I saw that question, and I wondered that did the mum say she was forgiving in that hug?
Yes, that was the idea. Yeah.
So maybe I mean each person is unique, and each person has different needs as to how they want to address that kind of trauma. And I think for people who go through bereavement from murder and violence, for them to feel they have to forgive is not helpful at all, because sometimes forgiveness is not relevant. And I actually not even sure what forgiveness is. Maybe forgiveness is like giving up revenge. Maybe forgiveness is about not letting the person who's hurt us carry on affecting us as we live our lives going on. I think for anyone to be able to meet in a restorative process, or the way I did it, which was completely breaking all the rules of restorative processes, needs support and preparation. You know, I do now work as a restorative justice facilitator, and we can prepare people for a year before we bring face to face someone who's perhaps meeting someone who killed their father. It would take a year, and then there'll be support afterwards, and there'll be no surprises in the face to face because we can know what will happen. But it has to be led from the person who's been hurt. It has to be something that they feel they want to do. I remember someone ring me or message me from Rwanda, where I'd spent time with him, and he'd lost like 45 members of his family, and he said, "Can you recommend that I go meet the person who killed my mother? Is it a good idea?" And I was like, if this is what your heart desires, if this is what you feel passionate about and you need, then I am here for you to do it in the way that for you to do it. And in the end, he went, and it was very helpful. We had to bring his whole community with him. It's complex. There's whole issues of betrayal and how other members of the family feel. So I think to do that kind of meeting with support is, you know, the best way. And we have restorative processes now to help us with that. The idea is it makes the person who's been hurt feel better. You know, that helps them to heal, helps them be able to let go of some of the fear or the pain that they have, so they can leave having, I don't believe in enclosure, but they can leave knowing they can put something there and carry on with their lives.
Fantastic, thank you. A lot to think about there. I'm now getting loads of questions through from the audience. So this one is from Jane for Father Greg. Could you say a little bit more about healing? Is it primarily relational, transformational to self? Meaning, how important is it to the process of sensory aspects of trauma, multiple ACEs? Sorry, I didn't read that very well. A little bit more about healing and the primary relationships.
You know, there was a verb that Joe used, severed. And so there's a severed sense of belonging. So everyone who comes into Homeboy Industries comes in with, you know, attachment issues and a disorganized attachment is what you would call it. And then it means, you know, mom was frightening or frightened, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. So the first stop always is a safe place, because unless people feel safe, they're not going to be able to do the inner work that's required, which is to excavate wounds and to the goal. If you don't become friends with your own wound, then you will be inclined to despise the wounded, but also despise your own wound. And so you need a safe place where people can re-identify who they are in the world, especially gang members. You have to move beyond the mind you have. You have to say, oh, I used to think courage was having a gun and using it. Now I see that has nothing to do with courage. But then you start to travel and you start to find the things that happen to you, and you come to terms with it. And unless you transform your pain, you can't, you'll continue to just transmit it and inflict it. And so once they see that, but it's hard because it's very painful and the temptation to self-medicate is high, which is why we drug test all the time, because we know it's hard to face what happened to you. And so, but we hold them in the meantime, and it's never, we don't care about surviving as the fittest, but what we're about is thriving as the nurtured. And once people feel nurtured, then they're in this peaceful place where they accept what happened to them. They're not paralyzed and crippled by it. They've made friends with their wound, and now they can greet the world with greater compassion. It's kind of how it works. But it can only, I think it only really happens in communities. So it's not just that class you took or that therapist you're talking to. All these things are good, but it's a communal, relational thing. And that's essential, I think.
Thank you for that. Thank you for expanding on that. Can I put this one to you, Paul? It's from one of my own team, James. We now know how to treat trauma effectively, but how do we prevent it? How do we create a culture where our children are more cherished and nurtured in the context of a safe and loving relationship? That's not an easy question to answer, but you wouldn't expect anything easy from James, you know. So
no, but if it was all easy, we would have done it by now. So it's really interesting because we talk about being trauma informed, but I think that's part of a spectrum. So I was thinking about this beforehand. I think we start off by being aware. So in other words, we know that trauma exists, because in some contexts there's not even awareness. And then when we become aware, we begin to want to know more, and so we become informed. And as we become informed, we're able to become more responsive. And as we become more responsive, we become more capable. And as we become more capable, we're reaching the point when we can prevent. And the reason for saying that, Niven, is this, that I fear a context in which we might think that being trauma-informed is enough. And it's not. It's not knowledge that matters, it's action. And so responsiveness and capability, I think, are the route to prevention, not just being informed. Because it's only by being responsive and capable that we will get in contact with the people who are young enough before they become the parents of the next traumatized generation. We can help the generations that already are with us, but I think one of our chief objectives must be to help the generations that are not yet with us. And that to me, you talk about hope after trauma. Well, if that hope could come out of this that we're experiencing, what a great thing that would be. Imagine a situation in which we were collectively willing to help people who are not yet born and who might never know that we existed. That would be a good thing to do.
Fantastic thought. You know, I posed that question to a friend of mine who wanted his police division to be trauma informed. It's great that it's trauma informed. What next? What does that mean? So I think that builds on this. Really, I've got one here from Kirsty for you, Joe. How do we help the 34,000 families in the UK who are grieving but are doing so in isolation?
Oh, that's just so sad and tragic, and that is the trauma that's happening right now. And Father Greg talked about safety, you know, for all those people, they've lost their safety, is gone, and the ways they would find that again is so much harder because they haven't, the hugs and the meeting and the shared grief is so difficult. And it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of time for them to get the support that they deserve. I think we all have a responsibility to reach out, and we probably all know people who are in that situation, and to say, I'm here for you, I care, tell me how you are, tell me how you feel, and to help people through all the different ways that we have. But there's once we all can get to see each other again, there's going to be an awful lot of trauma that's going to start healing. And I think it is about safety. Is how can we create that safety? At the moment, I'm sensing, and there's a lot of anger around as well, especially the last couple of days. I don't know whether that, I mean, that's probably more UK, the recent events in some of the politicians in the UK from London, and that anger, it feels that it's just getting stronger and stronger, and I don't know where it's going to go. But I think people have a huge need to be heard and to be acknowledged and validated, and to know that they count, that their loved ones count and they matter. And I know online there's different places where people are talking about their loved ones and that people are signing books. But what do we need? I'm just suddenly thinking maybe when we're through this, we need to have like a mass sharing grief. Like I know, like in Burundi, they have extraordinary rituals they do for grief. And I don't think we're so good at doing that, but maybe we need to do something which is going to include the grief of so many people together publicly, and to let people wail and be heard, and to find ways to express it, but in a safe way.
You must face similar yourself, Greg. You talked earlier about conducting funerals for gang members. There must be similar grief across the pond.
Yeah, you're especially with death. I mean, you're supposed. I think that the lifelong task is to see that there are many things more powerful than death, like love, for example, and then somehow you take the power away from death. But we're all grieving a little bit, but and sometimes a lot of it, and yet I think the thing with grief is you lean into it and you don't flee it, and you kind of get curious about it. And then somehow, if you keep leaning, you can get to a place where you're savoring it, oddly, relishing it even. And then finally you find your way to joy. And I just think it's sort of how it works. I mean, if you allow yourself to think differently about it, but otherwise we get stuck in the sadness of it, and there's a way out of it, but it's kind of counterintuitive. You have to kind of turn to it rather than flee it, and that always becomes the problem, because then the terror of it chases you if you flee from it. But then you kind of allow, I mean, this is sort of Buddhist, I suppose, and I feel like I'm half Buddhist and half Jesuit, but it's like you somehow you feel it, you allow yourself to savor it, and the oddest thing happens. You become freed from the grief itself, and then something else. Once you kind of propel yourself from your own self-absorption, frankly, and you focus on the other, and being other-centered is sort of the first step, but then you become loving-centered, which is the path to real joy. And it's hard, and I think even speaking as a priest, people shake their fist at God all the time, and I always think, well, what does God have to do with it, And the gang members have taught me that, why would you make God an accomplice or a crime partner? I believe God protects me from nothing, but sustains me in everything. And that's a big difference for me anyway. And rather than a fix it all, why did you allow this to happen kind of shaking your fist, I don't really get that. But that keeps us stuck in a mindset that it will always be unhappy.
Well, given your Buddhist Jesuit leanings, I can maybe ask you this question as well, which came in earlier on from Ross. He asked, what role does meditation play in overcoming the current crisis?
Is that for me?
Yeah, I thought I'd give that one to you, given a.
Well, yeah, I think it. So part of the thing is, you know, we make the mistake of chasing happiness when what we're meant to do is sort of practice tranquility. You know, and meditation kind of gets you there, where you can stay anchored and centered, and you can put first things recognizably first, and you can live as though the truth were true, and all these things can get you to the place where we're meant to be, which is joy. And is joy possible in a pandemic? Of course it is, but you have to kind of let go of the things that you're attached to, and meditation certainly is a way to find the freedom to have a lighter grasp on life. But it's clinging that will always bring suffering, and it always has. The more you can, on some level, not mind what happens, that's where tranquility and serenity and peace come from. When you just say, yeah, you know, I'm going to accept what is, and I don't mind what happens. And that's a tough one, because people want to shake their fist and be angry. And I respect what people feel, but I also, you know, your hope is that people will be freed to find their way to joy, which is God's dream come true for everybody.
Thank you. And linking that to Joe's last answer, there's a lot of anger in the UK just now, and maybe a few people could do some meditations. Paul, here's one specifically for you, because it's about the NHS, and it says specifically for Paul. So many NHS staff are exhausted and have dealt with so much fear and trauma during the COVID crisis, being isolated from families, witnessing distress and death. The NHS seems supportive of the well-being agenda just now, but that can easily slip away. How do we hang on to it? There is that well-considered thought that we can't look after ourselves unless we can't look after others unless we look after ourselves.
That's really immensely important. The Royal College of Nursing has or had on the front page of its website, self-care is not selfishness. And that's really important. You know, in the same way, and I'm no one to talk about running, by the way, because my running days ceased about 30 years ago when I stopped playing rugby. But you know, in the same way as you wouldn't try to run a race without training, you would look after yourself. You would take account of your physical condition, your mental condition, and your diet. So if you were competing in something, you would take certain steps to make yourself as fit as you could be in every sense. Well, we're not, the health service and the care services and all the other public services we've mentioned, they're not a competition. But if we have made a genuine commitment to public service, then the people we're here to serve deserve us at our best, not at our worst. And yes, people will work long hours, and yes, people have worked until they're exhausted. And, you know, we shouldn't hesitate to thank them for that. But if we are going to have a new balance, you know, and I say this in all sobriety, heaven forbid that working people to exhaustion becomes our new normal. It cannot be. Otherwise, everyone is less well served. So I think one of the things we need to be thinking really hard about as we transition through phases, because there will be phases of this readjustment, is how are we going to be explicit in building in time for people to recover? It won't happen by accident. It won't happen by chance. And I think we're going to have to factor that in to the designs we make of the way that we deliver services. That would be my thought, Niven.
Thank you. I mean, I was a staff representative for the police for years, and I know the hours some police officers work, and I think that's really important. It's going to be a challenge for the leaders in these positions to allow that to happen, but hopefully that message will get through. Joe, I'll come to you with this one. It's from Graham. how can we instill selflessness in society? My mum is shielding. She'll continue to shield when lockdown is reduced. Thinking beyond yourself is a challenge. How do we become a less selfish society?
I think that our natural state is to want to think about other people, is to want to care, is to want to be compassionate. That's who we are. And trauma's got in the way, stress has got in the way, pressures of life's got in the way, our wounds have got in the way, our mindset's got in the way, like lots of obstacles. But I think that's really who we all are. If we strip away them and we're healed, we want to care for each other. And I see that caring really being there more than ever at the moment. There's just, I'll give you an example. I have a very vulnerable member of my family who doesn't live near me, and I had to find support for her where she lives. And it was extraordinary what was already there in this little area of Kent, and people who would go to her house and bring food. And so it's no longer random acts of kindness. It is daily acts of kindness is happening. That is who we are when we are healed. And we need to hold on to that and to know that that is our strength, and that's more important than perhaps some of the things we used to believe was success. To me, success is about everyone who's shielding and who needs help, getting the help and getting the love, and creating what we've all talked about, creating a society where we build in recovery time for all those that have been on the front line and are exhausted and stressed and traumatized, everything we've talked about. But that's who we are. We are naturally, I believe, when we're healed or in the process of healing, loving.
Thank you. I don't know whether either the other panel members want to come in on that as well. Any thoughts, chaps? Paul? I think you're still on mute.
I'm still on mute, which is unusual for me. Yeah, I think the point, I've been thinking about this, the point that Joe makes about what's actually there is really important. And I suppose I would want to add to that slightly, Niven, by saying, although in some contexts we have lost many things temporarily, the ability to be in touch with one another in the way that we were, the ability to go to places that we would have gone to relax or enjoy ourselves, or to play sport, or to watch theatre or whatever it might be, we haven't forgotten a lot of things that we knew. I think I've certainly found it in myself, almost a tendency to think that we've somehow just been dumped in a bath of water and come out knowing nothing and being able to do nothing, and that's actually quite a defeatist attitude. Although I felt it myself. We're learning to navigate without a map, but we're finding that there are more signposts than we thought there might be. And we haven't forgotten how to care. We haven't forgotten how to love. We haven't forgotten how to be in touch with people. We haven't forgotten how to support one another. We haven't forgotten the good intentions that we had. We may have to express them differently, and I think this point's been made already. But the point is not to allow this current crisis to curtail us, to squeeze us into such a small compass that we cease to do the things that we already know how to do and we already do well.
Thank you, Paul. Greg, is there anything you want to add to that, or shall I have another question here for you? What practical advice would you give to someone who's experienced trauma and wants to begin a journey of healing?
Well, Paul was talking earlier about sort of diagnosing, and sometimes the problem in the world sometimes are bad diagnoses. Somebody sent me a book yesterday, very well-intentioned woman, and the book was something to hand to kids, and it said how to make better choices. Well, the whole premise of that book is a bad diagnosis. That what we have here are kids who make good choices and kids who make bad choices, without understanding, as Joe said earlier, violence is a language. It's a behavior. You want to get underneath it, or as one of the homies often says, find the thorn underneath. So you want to diagnose correctly. If we think the problem in the world with young people anyway is that they make bad choices, then we try to kind of insert message here. But not all choices are created equal. Somebody who's a 9 or a 10 on the ACEs study, what are you talking about? That's not the same as me, who was a 0 growing up with, in a healthy, privileged environment. I didn't choose to become a gang member, but that's sort of an absurd notion. So kind of diagnosing things right is important. And so, a lot of times there's a kind of a mentality among gang members where it's hard for them to see it because it's too painful to let in what happened to them. And so they kind of go in some kind of rabbit hole directions. And so the hope is to be able to provide some kind of tenderness and nurturing, so that in that safe environment they can somehow see what actually happened to them. And our ability to live in a place of utter denial is quite extraordinary, and I've watched it time and time again, where the pain is so great that gang members can't even get even near it because it's so huge, and the enormity of it keeps them from opening their eyes. But once they know that you have them and you're holding them, even as challenging as it is to hold people in a time of keeping your distance, it's still possible.
Thanks, Greg. So some wonderful thoughts there as well. I've been asked to put this next question to all the panel members, so I'll come to you. I'll always start with you, Paul, and then go around. It's from Pauline. It says, how do we break down professional barriers and become better collaborators for the sake of our children and young people? And I've experienced this both in the public sector, but particularly in the third sector, where organisations perhaps looking to look after their own funding and don't tend to work with other organisations. How do we break down these barriers?
Yeah, I think the first thing, Niven, is just to acknowledge that they exist. We sometimes can spend a long time pretending that we all want to work together, but the reality is that actually the barriers are there. Again, to share something that I have, a phrase I've used often, may sound slightly odd. Sometimes the fastest way to stop something is to agree with it. And what I mean by that is, we all get together and we all agree that we should share. So we've all agreed that we should share, but actually nothing happens. All that's been reached is agreement to share. The actual sharing doesn't happen. So it's getting over that, if you like, external and superficial agreement. And frankly, one of the best ways to do that is for people to be exposed to the reality of what is happening in people's lives. And then they begin to see the point. The point is not, how can I protect my budget? How can I make sure if I had a team of 20 last week, I'll have a team of 20 this week? The point is, what would make the most difference to that person? What would cause the greatest change for their benefit, and work backwards from that? Now, that doesn't ignore the fact that there are different institutional boundaries, there are different constitutional boundaries, and there are different governance systems in place. But one thing I can say with some certainty is that most of the people in leadership positions that I worked with did want this to happen. So we weren't trying to, there wasn't a resistance to making it better. The difficulty was that people then went back and were held to account in different ways for different things. So I think one of the ways to break down professional boundaries is to understand and respect more what other professions do and are doing. It's not about saying, well, you know, I'm from health and you're from social work, therefore my view counts more than yours. Actually, what would always try to do, and as you'll know, I did it with the police as well. I mean, I went and, you know, spent time with frontline social workers and with frontline police officers, and I learned a huge amount by doing that I wouldn't have known in the sort of written briefings and advice and guidance that you get when you're sitting in an office. So one of the ways to break down barriers is actually to walk past them and go and find out what the people at the front line actually think. Because what they think truly matters. It's really important. And until we hear it, we'll not make the progress that we need to.
Thank you. So Joe, have you got thoughts on that as well? I mean, even from the service users' thought, so many different people providing so many services. How do we break down and make it easier to navigate?
Well, just to add from what Paul said, I think it's really important to know that everybody has their story. Everybody has a life outside work that they're bringing in. And is there a way that we can connect as human beings before the day starts? You know, can we have circles where we check in? And if there is someone who has more power in the organization, can they be more vulnerable? You know, is it safe for them to disclose something about, you know, I'm really struggling today, you know, this happened to me. And then that then gives validation and permission for others to also struggle. There's a lot of people doing work and bringing like the restorative values into the corporate and into different businesses. And I think that, you know, when people feel empowered to be themselves, and not these perfect work people, but people who struggle and sometimes need to be challenged, but they are real people, then they want to work more, they want to be the best they can be. So I would like Ron to bring some vulnerability and some kind of circles where maybe there's some appreciation sometimes, or some gratitude, and at least in that circle there's some kind of equality, with the person who perhaps has the most power can be the most, start by being vulnerable.
Thank you. Greg, have you the same issues across America and Los Angeles?
Well, you know, certainly we're in our silos, and that's probably not a good thing, I guess. But there's also, you know, a sense of, people always ask me, are you working with the police? And I always think, why? You know, because part of the problem, it's not anti-police, it's just, there's a presumption that if I'm working with gang members, then I should be working with the police. And for me, that's kind of a head scratcher. It's like, we're an intervention program. So if you're in a gang and you want to step away, we are the place you should come to. But we're not a prevention program. So if somebody were to say, are you working with the schools? And I would go, why? You know, again, because we have this notion that somehow it doesn't, I mean, there's something very distinct about what people do. But if you think that law enforcement's job is to solve the entirety of the gang problem, well, then your question makes sense. Are you working with the police? But since that's a ridiculous notion, they have one job, which is to protect and serve. But it has little impact on what we do, which is a community of healing. It has no impact on it. And so we get into this mindset where somehow it's a bad thing to be in a silo. And I don't think it's all that bad. I think there's some logic to it, you know? Because prevention happens with loving, caring adults who pay attention. So in the schools, you know, God bless them. And that's such an important role. But I'm not sure why would we need to connect? And and I know that kind of goes against some grain, but it doesn't make any sense to me, because I think people have different roles. And if you look at Homeboy and say, solve the entirety of the gang problem, I think that's a ridiculous notion. We do one thing. And I think we do it well, and we do it in a way that can be modeled. But we do one thing. And so to think that every program needs to do all things, or so I think it's kind of a false notion to me. You know, you connect when you need to connect, but you don't have to invent ways for Homeboy Industries to connect to a kindergarten class. You know, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
I think there's I think there's parallels between your answer and Paul's answer. If you work back from what somebody needs, work back from there.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm being prompted to ask a question which I missed earlier on, and it's probably important. So another man of the cloth, Richard Rohr, is quoted as saying, "If we do not transform our pain, we most assuredly transmit it." So how important is it that we acknowledge that we've got trauma, we're carrying trauma today, to ensure that we don't inflict or suffer greater pain further down the road? I'll start with you, Greg, again, if I may.
Yeah, I think people can't find their way to wholeness and to their true selves in loving unless they can acknowledge things. So, you know, I knew a gang member whose mother used to put cigarettes out on him and hold his head in the toilet and flush till he nearly drowned. And he ran away from home at 9 years old. And that's why he joined a gang. But there was a time in his life when you asked him, and once somebody did in a classroom at a university, why did you join a gang? And he gave that answer, you know, the answer, join a gang and see the world, wine, women, and song. I wanted to belong. It was my second family. It was a totally false answer, because he joined a gang because his mom used to put cigarettes out on him and hold his head in the toilet till he nearly drowned. That's why he joined a gang. And unless he can make that connection, he's never going to know happiness, because you can't live in denial and keep your pain festering without transforming it. And so, and the proof is in the pudding, because traumatized people keep traumatizing, and it's because they haven't befriended their wound, and it's just simply an essential piece of it. And again, the proof is in watching people having done it, and then they're resilient, and then the world will throw at them what it will, including a pandemic, and they're not toppled by it because they transformed their pain.
Thank you for that, Greg. Paul, do you want to build on that? Or you?
Yeah. Transform or transmit. I go back to what we were discussing earlier about forgiveness. The Latin word is pardonare, and we translate that to pardon. And that what that means is to give without reserve. And forgiveness is really giving away our resentment and anger completely. It involves giving away what we had a right to. We have a right to be resentful and angry if we've been badly treated. But in forgiveness, you give that away. And the great thing about it is, in giving it away, it no longer affects me, and it no longer affects the other person either. It actually benefits both. It doesn't just benefit the giver And it doesn't just benefit the receiver, it benefits both. And we don't give it to them, we give it away. It goes away. There's an old parable, I'll call it, in Jewish teaching of a goat, and from thence comes the word scapegoat. But what happens to the scapegoat is that the things that were done that were wrong are laid on the head of the scapegoat. And what happens then is that all the tribe stands and watches the goat walking away into the wilderness, and it never comes back. Now, we think of a scapegoat as someone who's punished, and that may also have an application. But in this context, the great thing is to be able to stand and watch these things that we had carried as burdens for so long going away into the wilderness and never coming back. So they don't trouble me and they don't trouble you. They're gone. And the alternative, as we've been saying, is either that or we transmit them, because they're real, they're live, they're extant. So unless we can send them away, they'll stay with us. There's a really, it's a pretty harsh way of putting it, but there's a really important statement being made about bitterness. And someone said, ultimately, bitterness is like drinking poison and hoping that your enemy will die. Mm-hmm. And the only person we're poisoning is ourselves. So there's a huge amount in that. Transform it or transmit it. And the way we change it, in my view, is by sending it away, by giving it away.
I take it you would echo these sentiments, Joe?
Yes, I even use that expression. That's my definition of forgiveness. So totally resonate with everything you've just said, Paul. And I think for me, it was important to end the cycle of violence and revenge. And I did that by going on this journey and eventually becoming friends with Patrick Magee. And I no longer see him as my enemy. I see that if I lived his life, I wonder if I would have made the same choices he made, and I don't know. And in that moment, there isn't even anything to forgive. There's him on his journey and me on my journey. And I've had that moment of connection and empathy with people who've done many violent acts around the world. And that changes and heals me. But it doesn't mean that I'm always someone who's loving and peaceful. Like there are times when I still want to hurt people, but I'm really aware of it. And if I do at times hurt people, then I will want to repair the damage. And I want to have those conversations to say, I'm aware I've hurt you. Please share with me the impact of what I've done. Tell me what it was like. Recently I did that with my 3 daughters, who I managed to upset all of them, which was very clever. And to each one of them, and they shared the impact of some of the words that I'd used, and we managed to heal it. So for me, it's not about all the time being loving and healed, but I'm super aware that I have the capacity to really hurt people. I know I can kill. I know that there have times when I felt that. And that, I think, for me, is the most important thing of transforming trauma, is knowing that I still have the capacity to hurt people, but I'm choosing with that awareness to reach out, to let go of my pain, to let go of my wish to revenge. Because I believe if I blame someone, I might get a short-term gain, but then I'm going to be left with the feelings of the guilt and the shame and the fact that I've then got to heal this messy relationship. I know it doesn't work. And I would very much like to see this way of acknowledging our wounds and recognizing that, yes, we're all doing our best, but we are actually all still wounded. And part of transforming trauma, I think, is really knowing that, is that we still have that capacity to hurt each other.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to pull this to a close now. I thank you all for your contributions. It's been great. I've been trying to field the questions and listen to you at the same time, and it's not so easy. But you've all contributed greatly to providing a bit of hope for people during this very difficult time. And the people in the audience who have been following, thank you very much. I'm sorry if I didn't get through all the questions. There were quite a lot, and some of them were related. So I tried to take a few that covered some of the ground people were asking. I hope you've enjoyed this. We decided with such an interest in this, we're going to have another one. So on 4 o'clock on Wednesday, June the 17th, we're going to talk about youth violence. And we've got a panel all from the UK this time. Graham Armstrong, the author of the book, The Young Team, is on the Times top 10 bestseller list just now. Darrell Lyons, a friend of ours, a police officer from Northampton, is running the Community Gangs project there. And Whitney Earls, who's done a lot about changing the system, changing how we view criminality, and is the CEO at Project 507. And I hope that one will be chaired by Will Linden, our Deputy Director, which means I can sit and enjoy it and listen to these experts speaking. Thank you very much also to my team that put this together, particularly Suzanne and to Grant, who did a great job. And hopefully you've all enjoyed it, and we will be slicing it up and putting it on little sections on Facebook as well. So thank you for joining us. Hope to see you on the 17th of June. And thank you very much again to our panel members.
Thank you.